Tall Tale TV.
Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 24, Mycena. It's true what they say, that your life flashes before your eyes right before you're sure to die. Brig always thought that he'd be the exception, but here he was, reliving his life as if an old reel was playing in his mind. Having his first drink of hard liquor before he was even out of diapers. His first cigar at the tender age of 8. Winning that first game of high-stakes poker. And the scrawny merc across from him who accused him of cheating. Technically, he wasn't wrong, but the others didn't have to know that. And ever since that moment, Brig couldn't recall having a better friend. Being dragged into the other world, what felt like forever ago, had offered him a similar sort of vision. Except back then, it had been less about his life and more of an inebriated blur of colors. But even through that drunken haze, Attila came in clear as day to the front of his memory. The one guy who constantly had his back, no matter the odds. He might be a little too loud, sometimes obnoxious, and always hazardous to the immediate infrastructure. But he was the kind of guy that would jump on a grenade for you if it came down to it. It didn't matter that he was probably the one who threw it in the first place. It was the thought that counted. Brig decided when or if he made it out of this and got back to his old life, he would have to buy Attila the best bottle of whiskey he could afford. Well, maybe not the best, but an expensive-ish bottle would do. And then the highlight reel was over, and Brig was ejected with the full force of a tattered wormhole into the desolate sands of the other world. He stumbled over his giant feet and slid down a sand dune. He was sure it had not been beneath the gateway when they'd left here before. He sprang to his feet, raised Scarlet over his head, and charged forward with a primal battle cry. It took him a moment of swinging and slashing to realize that the gate was no longer surrounded by the mobs of bugs or unseen that he had been expecting. Well, in a sense. Their corpses littered the ground, a mass shallow grave extending to the horizon. Brig stabbed at one with the tip of his sword, and it collapsed into itself. Bits of dried skin, still dripping in black ooze, sloughed off like fetid cheese. He had only a cursory glance around before the rest of his traveling companions slid down the same embankment and collided into him as a tangle of arms and legs. His back hit the tough, knobbly exoskeleton of a giant dead bug, and he felt the wind escape his lungs. Attila jumped to his feet and offered a hand down to his friend as he looked around at their apparently barren surroundings. "Whoa! Way to go, buddy! But, overkill much?"
"I didn't do this."
Brig pulled himself up and retrieved Scarlet from the ground. "Humility, huh? That's what I've always liked about you, big guy. Never one to brag." Attila gave him a friendly punch in one of his biceps.
"Well, I mean, that's true and all, but, seriously, I didn't do this."
Brig's mustache twitched a little as he turned to look at the portal over his shoulder.
"Ugh, what is that smell?"
Vel braced the back of his hand against his face. He didn't really need to ask. He already knew. The pungent smell of decay was nearly tangible. Evan reached up and tore a bit of ragged cloth from Attila's poncho and wrapped it around his nose and mouth like a bandana. "Is this because of one of those time defibrillation thingies again?" "Hey!" Attila pulled the back end of his poncho around to examine the sizable portion of fabric that was now missing. He whipped his head around to glare down at the tiny merc.
"Probably."
Errik stepped into the center of the group, pushing Attila aside as he tried to get the others' attention.
"We need to focus. Alpha is right on our tail."
"Right," Evan nodded. "What's the plan?" Errik held up the portal locker,
Okay, we have to wait for him to get into this realm, set the dial for home, reconfigure the device back into a bomb, hit the timer delay, and jump through the gateway. All before he squishes us,"
Errik offered, with a slight nervous chuckle and a nod. "Oh, is that all?" Evan's face pulled into a disapproving scowl. He might have been able to save them from the monolith when it was just a basic AI program. But Alpha? There was no way. He didn't stand a chance. His fingers fidgeted nervously over the handle of his machete. "How long do you think we got to prep?" A terrible sound split the air, as if the universe itself wailed in despair, as two sets of giant stone hands grabbed the inner edges of the portal. Like cracks in a looking glass, fissures began forming in the space around the vortex, as Alpha forced the gateway wide enough to accommodate his new, massive stone form. Brig gestured with his sword at the creature, forcing its way into their dimension.
"I ain't no expert, but I'd guess not long."
Errik gave him a patronizing look and set to work, the others following his lead. Alpha let out a triumphant snarl as he pulled his torso through the damaged portal. He turned on the others, spreading his fingers wide to wrap around them. He wanted to feel their insides pop as he squeezed the life from them. The sudden stink of decay filled his stone nostrils, and he retched, falling the rest of the way through the portal to collapse among the bones and rotting flesh. The monolith's body may have only had one working eye, but it still allowed him to survey the vast emptiness of the otherworld. Alpha's head swam, all strength evaporating from his limbs. Motionless, on all fours, he remained rooted, his head swaying back and forth in a desperate attempt to see what wasn't there. This wasn't right. This wasn't real. But it was. They were gone. His children. Gone. Alpha let out a howl of anguish as he scooped up a tiny, frail body.
"No. No,"
he repeated, cupping the lifeless form in his giant stone hands.
I can't. Why?"
Alpha paused, placing the body back into the sand with a gentleness unknown to him, his hands shaking as his giant stone body heaved with silent sobs. Brig couldn't help but pity the creature, even if only a little.
"It wasn't us."
Alpha turned his angry amethyst eye on them, watching as they scurried among the corpses of his offspring. He slammed both of his stone fists into the ground. A tidal wave of sand rippled away from him.
"My children starved to death because you tore me from my home."
He watched as the little humans scattered before him, tripping on one another in their haste to escape.
"Without my guidance, they were defenseless."
Brig threw Attila to the side as a stone fist buried itself where they had been standing.
"Nobody made you leave. Nobody made you follow us. This is on you."
He paused long enough to jab a fat, accusatory finger up at him. Alpha screamed his rage into the sky and threw himself toward Brig. But his stone body, while extremely powerful, was marginally slower, and it was like trying to swat a fly with a fork. Vel dragged Errik away from the fight by his shirt collar, forcing him behind a small boulder. "Hurry up and fix that damn thing, while the hick has Alpha distracted." Errik thumbed the destination dial and turned to see the portal give a feeble flicker.
"Alpha's done a fair amount of damage to the gateways. I don't know if that worked. We could end up anywhere." "Anywhere is better than here." "Fine. We'll make the jump. I just need to reconfigure the..."
Vel put his hand up to stop his brother's rambling.
"Whatever. Just hurry up. Brig can't keep dodging those punches forever."
The The words had barely left him when he noticed a growing shadow and looked up. He cursed, grabbed a fistful of coat fabric, and yanked, pulling himself and his brother out of the way of an oncoming stone foot. The momentum from the overzealous tug sent Errik stumbling backward, where he collapsed into the sand behind the gateway, narrowly avoiding being sliced in half by the swirling, jagged edges of the vortex. The sleeve of his coat and a sizable chunk of his forearm were not so lucky.
"Hey, get out of here! This is our hiding spot!"
Evan shoved against Errik, trying to urge him back out into the open. Errik looked down at his bleeding forearm and back up. Attila and Evan were busy drawing plans in the dirt with a bone from one of the dead creatures. Well, Evan was making tactical battle strategies, and Attila was drawing stick figures being exploded. Errik sighed and bonked the merc on the head through his hat.
Get over here and help me fix this.
"Fix what?"
Erik's mouth pulled into a line.
I changed the portal, but I can't seem to get the device recalibrated back into your bomb settings.
He rolled his eyes a little as he said that, and thrust the device into Attila's hands.
Fix it.
Attila turned the locker over in his hands, popping open a back panel and pulling out components.
"No can do. I told you last time that tearing it open would fry the wiring."
Errik pulled a sharp breath in through his nose, willing himself to refrain from making Attila eat his hat.
I get that. So how do we fix it?
"Well, that depends on what you mean by fix."
Attila tossed the bone behind him and pointed at the drawing in the sand of a stick figure exploding.
"Does manual detonation count?"
Brig rolled out of the way of another clumsy punch. He barely had a moment's notice to brace himself as a second stone fist sent him skidding across the sand. His muscles ached as he forced himself back to his feet, blood and sweat streaming down his face.
Will, you guys, hurry it up.
Alpha reached down with a massive hand and forearm and made a broad, sweeping motion with the underside of his arm, sending a wave of sand and dead bodies hurtling towards Brig. It was too wide to dodge and moving too fast to outrun. Brig bit down on his resolve and charged the oncoming wall. He leapt into the air, tucking into a cannonball just before making contact. It hit him like a tornado of glass, the sharp particulates and jagged bone shards ripping into his exposed skin and shredding his clothes. Brig recoiled in pain when Alpha's arm made contact with his shins. The force hit him hard enough to send him end over end, skipping across the sand like a throwing star. He landed hard on his side, his shoulder crying out in pain. But he knew every moment counted, and he ignored the dislocation. He rolled to his feet and broke into a dead run in a random direction.
Seriously, anytime now.
Attila snapped the panel back into place.
"Done. It's a bit of a rush job, but it should hold up long enough for a single use."
Fine, just give it here.
Errik reached over and pulled the device from Attila's hands.
"Remember, it's manual now. You have to hold down the button and spin the dial to 0 to get the bomb to detonate."
Attila looked around the group nervously.
"So, who gets to stay behind?"
Evan looked up, paying attention for the first time.
"Wait, we have to use it on this side? What the hell kind of plan is that?"
Another heavy stone foot slammed into the ground, rattling and shaking the earth beneath their feet. Errik tried to quiet the panic in his mind as he stared down at the tiny device in his hands.
The kind of plan that saves worlds.
He looked over at the monster they had helped set loose.
We can't allow him to get free again.
He closed his eyes. This small metal thing would become his end. irony, he supposed. Errik shook away those thoughts and looked up at the others.
Get them out of here.
Don't be stupid. Vel stepped forward and held out his hand expectantly.
No!
Errik took a step back, trying to keep the distance between the two of them.
I made this tech. I made you come with me. I let him loose.
Erik's voice faltered, the full force of what he had done finally sinking in.
I killed all those people.
Vel lowered his hand, the look in his eyes softening.
Incoming!
Brig crashed straight into Vel like a comet, his trajectory creating a small crater around them both. The ground shook beneath them once more. The steps were more thunderous, more purpose-driven. Alpha had them all in one place now. It wouldn't be long before he crushed them beneath his angry stone fists. Errik looked down at the device. His hands were shaking. Why were they shaking? If he was so confident in his decision, then why was he scared? There has to be another way. Evan wrung his hands together, looking between the gate, Alpha, and the brothers. Errik looked down at Evan and then over to Attila. He was surprised to find he would miss them. With a nod of his head, he gave Attila silent directions to get Evan out. Errik couldn't help but roll his eyes when the merc removed his hat in a silent salute. And before he could even mouth the words, "Just go," Attila plucked Evan out of the dirt and hopped into the portal.
Get off of me, you overgrown troll!
Vel shoved Brig off him and pushed himself to his feet.
Wait,
he urged, reaching for his brother. Errik shook his head.
I'm not giving in. This is my decision.
A ghost of a grin crossed his lips.
Besides, I'm older than you. I get to make the rules.
You idiot. Vel gave a heavy sigh as he pulled his brother into a one-armed hug. It was awkward. When was the last time they had done this? Had they ever?
I'm sorry it had to come to this.
Errik wrapped his arms around Vel.
Yeah, me too.
Vel gave a sad chuckle.
And since when have I ever listened to you?
He shifted one foot behind the other, and in one swift movement, grabbed the device and shoved his brother back. Brig was there, stone-faced and waiting for his cue. His mustache twitched, signaling that he understood, and wrapped his beefy arms around Erik's middle.
No! What are you doing?
Errik strained against the iron grip.
Something idiotic.
Vel smiled.
If anyone deserves this fate, it's me. I'm broken and useless. And, well, I promised Mom I'd take care of you. So here's to goodbyes. And, maybe don't let Attila fix any more of your stuff.
His smile flickered as he nodded to a blood-stained Brig. Vel watched as Errik disappeared through the portal, his protests cut short as he passed beyond the barrier between this world and the other. He let out a shaky breath of air, dropping the face he had been putting on for Erik's sake. He wanted his brother to remember him that way, rather than the scared mess he really was. That would only make him blame himself more. Vel pushed the device against his thigh, pressing down the button at the top, and managed to thumb the dial. As it spun, numbers began to rapidly count down on a small display. He clenched shut his eyes, and the device reached 0. There was a small pop. Nothing at all grandiose, or dismembering like he had expected. Was that it? And then a shockwave erupted out of the device. He felt his body seize up, his cybernetic eye went dark, and he collapsed into the sand in a heap. The device must have emitted an EMP burst, causing his operating system to temporarily shut down. So much of him was reliant on his mechanical implants, he couldn't even move. Not that it would have mattered anyway. Alpha was practically on top of him now. Vel could just see the gateway out of his good eye. It gave a shudder, and then a hectic sort of warble. And, slowly, it began to close. He let out a weak smile. Good. The plan had worked.
What did you do?
Alpha glanced at the portal, far too small now for him to enter, and then back to the cyborg. Vel grit his teeth.
What I had to.
Alpha growled.
Insolent little worm!
He reached down, scooping the broken man into his fist.
You think you have won?
He squeezed. Vel felt something in his left leg shatter. He squeezed again. This time, Vel was fairly certain nearly all his ribs had broken. He struggled to breathe. Probably a punctured lung, he thought, as he turned his attention to the gateway. It was now little more than a glowing line in the air, as if an invisible hand was suturing the seam together.
I will find a way back.
Alpha's eye glowed with a sinister rage as he squeezed once more. His body rippled with furious purple glyphs as he watched the cyborg's head fall limp to the side.
And I will make your brother watch as I destroy world after world.
Of Monsters and Mushrooms, an ongoing series by Lesley Herron, is a crossover fanfiction mixing her own characters and settings with a few of those created by author J.D. Wiley. She writes for the fun of devising new ways of messing with her characters and seeing just how much trouble they can get into.
Hey, Attila, you remember that time you accused me of cheating at poker?
You might have to be more specific. You cheat a lot.
The first time we met.
Oh, yeah! After I pointed out that there aren't 6 aces in a deck, half the bar tried to take a shot at you. Ah, good times. What about it?
How is it they got so worked up about the 6 aces in my hand, but not the 5 kings in yours?
What can I say? A true master of cheating at cards knows how to read a table, knows how to work the other players like pieces on a chessboard, understands the intricacies of psychological manipulation.
You were hoping they couldn't count to 5, weren't you?
Yeah, pretty much.